singing the sweetest romantic melodies about love. Yet the man who soundtracks everyone else's happy ending actually lived a reality that was the exact opposite. Now at 84, the billionaire legend is finally breaking his silence to reveal the truth about a love deeply etched into his soul and the heartbreaking story of how he lost her forever. Whose is he truly singing for? To understand the gravity of this late-life revelation, you have to rewind to the moment. A working-class boy from Liverpool stepped into a blinding spotlight he would never truly escape. Paul McCartney was not just a musician, he was a global deity. As the driving force behind the Beatles, he helped sell over 600 million records worldwide. He could wake up with a melody in his head, pen the lyrics to Yesterday on a scrap of paper, and have the entire planet weeping by the weekend. When he walked out onto the grass at Shea Stadium in 1965, the screams of 50,000 people were so deafening the band couldn't even hear their own instruments. But standing at the absolute pinnacle of human adoration is a dangerously isolating place. He had the world, but the world, damn what, only wanted the myth. He cycled through high-profile romances, including a heavily publicized 5-year relationship with actress Jane Asher. They shared a London townhouse, attended film premieres, and played the perfect stylish couple for the flashing cameras of the swinging 60s. But the foundation of that public perfection was cracking. The women in his orbit loved the idea of dating a Beatle, but they could never quite grasp the crushing, suffocating pressure of actually being one. When the screaming stopped, the police escorts faded, and the stadium lights powered down. The silence waiting for him in empty hotel rooms was absolute. He possessed everything money could buy and everything fame could offer, yet he was wandering untethered. Fame is a crowded room filled with nobody. The turning point arrived in a dimly lit London club called the Bag o' Nails in May 1967. Here he met a photographer from New York named Linda Eastman. She wasn't a groupie. She wasn't trembling at the sight of rock royalty. She had built her own career, shooting the Rolling Stones, Aretha Franklin, and Jimi Hendrix. When she raised her camera, she didn't focus on the carefully constructed McCartney charm. She captured the tired, brilliant, overwhelming reality of the man underneath. She carried a sense of raw, unpolished authenticity that a man trapped in a relentless public relations machine found utterly intoxicating. While the rest of the world demanded that he perform, she simply allowed him to exist. She didn't want his fortune. She didn't care about the screaming crowds or the platinum records hanging on the walls. She offered him the single most elusive thing a billionaire icon could ever hope to find: a quiet place to hide. She didn't fall for the star. She just chose the man. They married in March 1969 at the Marylebone Register Office in London. There was no royal spectacle, no multi-million-dollar production, just two people walking through a crowd of weeping fans to sign a piece of paper. The timing of their union collided with the darkest period of Paul's professional life. By 1970, the Beatles were disintegrating in a bitter, highly public lawsuit. The band that had defined his entire existence was gone. Paul retreated to a run-down farmhouse in Scotland, spiraling into a profound depression. He stopped shaving. He drank heavily. He lay on the floor of a remote Scottish cabin, convinced his life as a creator was over. It was Linda who pulled him from the wreckage. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She handed him a guitar and told him to write. She became his keyboardist, his backup singer, and his absolute anchor. He wrote Maybe I'm Amazed, not as a generic pop hit, but as a desperate raw love letter to the woman who was physically keeping him alive while his world collapsed. Together they formed Wings, defying the critics who said he could never succeed without John Lennon. For the next 29 years, they raised 4 children, built an empire, and championed vegetarianism, all while spending exactly 10 nights apart throughout their entire marriage. And only because Paul was sitting in a Tokyo jail cell for a marijuana charge. They didn't just survive Hollywood, they ignored it. But a love story this profound always carries a devastating price tag. In 1995, the invincible bubble they had built was shattered. Linda was diagnosed with breast cancer. For 3 years, they fought the disease in absolute privacy. Paul, a man who could command stadiums with a single note, was completely powerless to save the only person who mattered. On April 17, 1998, in a ranch in Tucson, Arizona, Linda McCartney died at the age of 56. In her final moments, Paul sat by her bed and painted a picture in her mind, whispering that she was riding her beautiful Appaloosa stallion on a fine spring day. He closed her eyes, and the silence returned. He would later admit that he cried for a year straight, completely lost in a grief so heavy it physically altered him. He had survived the breakup of the biggest band in history, but he almost didn't survive the silence she left behind. Grief creates a vacuum, and vacuums pull in whatever happens to be passing by. This is where the paradox of Paul's romantic life takes a sharp, brutal turn. Enter Heather Mills. They met in 1999 at a charity event. She was a former model and amputee, and a fierce campaigner. To a man drowning in loneliness, her aggressive energy looked like a life raft. His children warned him. His inner circle begged him to slow down. But the king of love ballads, desperate to recreate the magic he had lost, ignored the red flags. They married in 2010 in a lavish $3 million ceremony at a castle in Ireland, a stark, glaring contrast to the quiet registry office where he had married Linda. The marriage was a spectacular disaster from the moment the ink dried. Where Linda offered a quiet sanctuary, Heather thrived on the chaotic glare of the tabloids. Where Linda wanted Paul, Heather wanted the McCartney brand. The relationship imploded in 2006, leading to one of the most toxic, expensive, and publicly humiliating divorces in British history. The courtroom battle in 2008 stripped away every ounce of dignity. The judge explicitly labeled Heather a status less than candid witness while she dumped a glass of water on Paul's lawyer's head. To finalize the severance, Paul was forced to hand over a staggering $48 million. The sheer irony was inescapable. The man who wrote the most universally beloved songs about pure, uncalculated romance had just paid tens of millions of dollars simply to buy his way out of a catastrophic mistake. He was searching for a lifeline. He grabbed an anchor. The dust eventually settled. The tabloid circus moved on to its next victim. Paul was left to survey the wreckage of his decisions and the reality of his own heart. In 2011, he found peace again, marrying Nancy Shevell, a quietly confident American executive. Nancy brought dignity back to his life. She didn't seek the cameras. She didn't demand the spotlight. And most importantly, she possessed the profound grace to understand the ghost she was sharing her husband with. She knew she was marrying a man whose heart was permanently anchored in a different decade. And that brings us to the quiet, unvarnished truth revealed at age 84. When Paul looks back at the sprawling, chaotic masterpiece of his life, the screaming crowds of Shea Stadium, the bitter lawsuits, the millions of dollars lost, and the global adoration won, the emotional apex remains unchanged. He admitted that the woman who definitively shaped his soul, the one who remains the absolute one, is Linda. It is a stunning psychological reality. You can find peace in your twilight years. You can learn to love again. You can rebuild a shattered life. But the soul then only ever finds its true counterpart once. Every time he steps onto a stage today, whether it's in front of 100,000 people at Glastonbury or a private crowd in London, and strikes the opening chords of Maybe I'm Amazed, he is not singing to the audience. He is not singing for the critics. He is projecting a frequency out into the universe, hoping it reaches a ranch in Tucson, Arizona, where a woman is riding an Appaloosa stallion on a fine spring day. You can remarry, but you cannot rewrite history. The immediate aftermath of the Heather Mills era. left a trail of devastation that extended far beyond a $48 million bank transfer. For Paul McCartney, a man who had carefully curated a public image of cheerful working-class dignity. For 4 decades, the 2008 divorce was a brutal, humiliating public execution. But the financial hemorrhage was only the surface of the wound. The true collateral damage was the fracture within his own family. His fiercely protective children, particularly fashion designer Stella McCartney, had seen through the facade from the very beginning. Stella had reportedly refused to accept Heather, resulting in a cold, agonizing civil war behind the closed doors of the McCartney estate. Paul hadn't just lost a staggering portion of his fortune. He had compromised the fiercely tight-knit family sanctuary that he and Linda had spent 29 years building. He didn't just lose his money. He temporarily lost his anchor. But survival requires a brutal kind of self-honesty, and Paul was forced to confront the psychological root of his colossal mistake. He had to forgive himself. He had to accept that the rushed marriage to Heather was not born out of genuine foundational love, but out of a blinding, desperate panic. When you have spent 3 decades waking up next to the exact same person, the sudden deafening silence of an empty bed can drive a rational man to irrational extremes. He married a chaotic illusion, simply because he was terrified of the quiet. He learned the hardest lesson a grieving widower can learn. A drowning man does not check the credentials of the person throwing the rope. The road to true reconciliation did not begin at the courtroom, but in the quiet realization that he could never replace Linda. He had to stop trying to cast a new actress in an old role. This profound psychological shift is exactly what paved the way for Nancy Shevell. When Paul began dating the American transportation executive in 2007, the press braced for another disaster. But Nancy was the antithesis of everything that had just destroyed him. She was independently wealthy, fiercely private, and entirely uninterested in leveraging the McCartney for a red carpet career. There is a micro detail in their relationship that holds the weight of a cinematic masterpiece. Nancy and her ex-husband actually knew Paul and Linda from decades earlier, as their families both owned homes in the Hamptons. Even more poignantly, Nancy is a breast cancer survivor herself. She did not walk into Paul's life trying to compete with a legendary ghost. She walked in carrying a profound unspoken respect for the very disease that had taken Linda away. When Paul and Nancy married at the Marylebone Town Hall in 2011, the exact same venue where he had married Linda in 1969, the symbolism was not an act of erasure, but an act of profound respectful continuation. Stella McCartney, who had vehemently opposed Heather, personally designed Nancy's wedding dress. That single piece of fabric was the ultimate physical proof that the family war was over. Nancy didn't demand to be the one. She was completely secure in being his final chapter. True love in your twilight years isn't about claiming the whole heart. It is about respecting the scars that shaped it. At 84, the consequences of Paul McCartney's romantic journey have settled into a beautiful, complicated legacy. He has found a genuine, steady happiness with Nancy, a woman who holds his hand while allowing him to openly weep for a woman who has been gone for 28 years. Linda's physical presence may have ended in 1998, but her fingerprints are everywhere. You can see her in the massive success of the Linda McCartney Foods vegetarian empire. You can see her in Stella's strict, cruelty-free fashion brand. And you can hear her every single time Paul sits at a grand piano in front of a stadium of screaming fans to play the chords of My Love. He teaches us a breathtaking lesson about the architecture of human life. We are often sold a Hollywood myth that true love is supposed to be flawless, a seamless ride into the sunset. Paul McCartney's life proves the exact opposite. True love is messy. It is punctuated by devastating loss, catastrophic rebound mistakes, and the agonizing process of starting over when you thought your story was already written. He learned that you can did deeply, genuinely love the person holding your hand today, while simultaneously acknowledging that your soul was definitively forged by someone you had to bury yesterday. When you look back at the sprawling, messy, magnificent tapestry of Paul McCartney's life, the music suddenly sounds different. It is no longer just a collection of pop hits. It is a real-time diary of a man trying to figure out how to love, how to grieve, and how to survive. Think about the people in your own life. We all have chapters we wish we could rewrite. We all have our own versions of a Heather Mills a mistake, born out of pain that cost us more than just money. And if we are incredibly lucky, we find a Nancy, a quiet, steady grace that arrives just in time to help us rebuild the broken pieces. But deep down in the absolute quiet of the night, most of us also harbor a Linda, the person who saw us when we were terrified, who handed us a guitar when we were lying on the floor, and who believed in us when we had forgotten how to believe in ourselves. The one whose memory still has the power to make our chest tighten decades after they are gone. As an 84-year-old billionaire, Legend looks back at a life most of us can only dream of. His ultimate conclusion strips away all the fame and leaves us with a stark universal question. Who is the person that permanently altered the trajectory of your soul? Do you believe that a human heart can only ever have one definitive counterpart, or can we truly love two people with equal, yet completely different intensity? If you had to write a song for the person who saved you, who would it be? Drop into the comments below and tell us your story. Who is the one in your timeline? Because at the end of the day, long after the stadium's empty and the cameras stop flashing, the only thing we actually get to keep are the memories of the people who chose to stay when the lights went out.